Welcome and thanks for joining me. This is really such a beautiful place and moment in the season, and we're gonna be walking in wonder. Somebody recently asked me, it was some interview that I was doing, how do you stay connected to a state of wonder, or what practices do you follow to stay connected to a state of wonder? And I said, I'm just always in a state of wonder whenever I'm out in the woods. It's just automatic for me because I'm always overcome with the beauty of whatever is there. So rather than stand around in on the gravel path here, I think we're gonna just immediately engage with the trail, and we'll stop and say a few more things there. You saw the cattails?
And how they are changing.
Yeah, what's happening?
They are starting to spread their seed.
That's right. Yeah. Are you all familiar with cattails? Maybe we can start there. You know, it makes the hot dog, right? Which is what? What is that? That's the female flower actually, right? And if you see sometimes in the high summer, oops, that little spike that sticks up is covered with yellow pollen, right? And that's the male flower. So it has female and male flower on one plant, which is common. Some plants do. And so then the pollen is carried by the wind. You know, the male pollen fertilizes other female flowers, and once it's fertilized, it makes these seeds. If you've ever thought like, oh, cattails so fetching for an indoor arrangement, then suddenly in the middle of winter, poof, all the seeds go all over your house. So what is this plant's strategy for spreading its seed? That's right. So this fluff is really just for that. See how effective it is? The seeds are tiny, tiny, tiny. Have you ever touched this? It feels incredibly satisfying. It's almost like wool. And then you can see the seeds, very, very tiny, just on the end of it, right? Yeah. So what else has a seed spreading strategy like this? What other plants? Dandelions, that's right. What else? Milkweed, yeah. One other one that's really common. Cottonwood, thistle, right? Finches love thistle. They eat the seeds and then they line their nests with the fluff. So, yeah, yeah. Uh, red-winged blackbirds love to nest in here. Yeah. All right. Let's keep. Oh, yeah. So you eat the shoots. Yes. And you can also eat the seed pod when it's still green. When it first comes up, it's like a little green, and the seeds around it are kind of, you can sort of braise it or boil it and eat it like little corn on the cob almost. It's pretty tasty. But the other thing to know is that the rhizomes, so the root-like structure, very, very filled with starch, and a common food source in the winter. You know, you have to be able to access it, so the water can't be fully frozen, but you can dig up a lot of the rhizomes, and through a process of leaching it out, you are basically left with a very starchy, almost like a flour that's high in nutrition. So it's a good emergency food source for people to know about. But yes, spreads through rhizomes. Yeah, both. But my favorite part is the shoots in the spring. They're really quite tasty. I did just want to show you this plant over here. Sorry. So part of getting to know the land around you is learning a new way of seeing. And that does require slowing down, and it requires paying attention, and it requires sort of activating your curiosity. Botanists have coined this term plant blindness to describe the way that we just blur everything into a single sea of green and we don't really differentiate between species anymore. It's kind of like going into a room of people and just deciding that you don't know anybody and you don't care, as opposed to going into a room of people and finding it filled with all your friends whose individual characteristics you can identify. Oh, that's Edith. She's got, you know, a perfect nose and really nice blonde hair, you know, or whatever. It's like you identify people by their characteristics, and that's the same way that you learn to identify plants. And you know, if you're not curious about it, I'm not sure what you're doing here. You're depriving yourself. You're depriving yourself of joy and pleasure and connection and a sense of wonder, because that's all the things that are waiting here for you to access. So this is a native plant. It's called American bladdernut, and it makes these incredible seed pods that look like little Japanese lanterns or something, right? So if you break those open, those have the seeds in them. And while I'm here, I'm noticing this plant, which is pretty ubiquitous. At this time of year, you see great hedges of it everywhere. You know what this is?
It looks like Sweet Annie, but I'm not really sure.
Yeah, Walter knows. Yeah, mugwort. And then how do you get the smell from plants? You rub it between your fingers, right? What's interesting to note about this plant and plants in general is that oftentimes as they grow up, the shape and quality of the plant can change. So you see how the leaves are very small and simple at the top of the plant? If you see mugwort early in the season when it's young, its leaves are much more complicated and bigger. What happens is when a plant is setting seed and making its flower and setting seed, it's putting all of its energy up into the plant, right? And so at that time, the roots become very woody and tough, and the rest of the plant doesn't get as much attention. The leaves will sometimes shrink, and it's focusing all its energy in the plant at the top, so the flowers and the seeds. And what I love at this time of year are the seeds, which are these little things that you can see at the top of the plant mostly. And if you rub those between your fingers, you'll really get a strong smell. Mugwort is also an insect repellent. It's great for keeping moths out of your sweater drawer. You could make a sachet with this. I like to eat the seeds. I like to dry them and grind them with salt. You can even come out in the field in the middle of winter and harvest the seeds. They'll still be very aromatic. And the whole plant is edible. It's quite bitter. I did see that Martha Stewart had a cream of mugwort soup recipe on her website. Yeah. So yeah, there are a lot of plants out here that you can use. It's traditionally been medicinal. Is it a native plant?
I believe so, yes.
It is not a native plant.
No?
No,
Ragweed?
it's European. I think ragweed, I don't know actually. I'm not sure. I read that Roman soldiers used to put mugwort in their sandals to keep their feet from getting tired. It has a long history. It came over with the European colonists, like so many of the plants that we have here. It's a fun one to know.
What are the health benefits of
So let's have a little walk. You know, a lot of people think that they can identify poison ivy by that old saying, leaves of three, leave it be, right? But you'll be leaving a lot of plants be if you go by that, because many plants have three leaves. So what would you say is a good way to identify it? If you had to describe that plant to somebody, what might you say? Well, it is leaves of three, right? I think one of my favorite ways to identify it is by noticing that the third leaf, the apex leaf that comes off the end, is on a longer stem. So these two are kind of have very short stems or almost no stems, see that? And then this one has a longer stem. So it's three leaves in that configuration. Beyond that, it's really tough to say because the leaves can look a little bit like an oak leaf. They can be very plain. They can be on the ground. They can be vining up a tree. When you see this very hairy looking vine like this on a tree, even in the middle of winter, do not touch it because you can get the poison ivy rash. What gives you the rash in poison ivy?
the oil?
Look at y'all. Look at that. I know the bad plants, they say, just not the good plants. Yes, urushiol, the oil that's in there. And so, but did you notice that poison ivy makes berries? It's an ivy like all those other ivies. It flowers and it makes berries. So yeah, it's a beautiful plant, but the urushiol is kind of a problem. So leave that one be. Why do the leaves turn color?
Because they're losing not enough chlorophyll.
That's right. So when the light begins to change, the trees understand that it's time to produce less chlorophyll. They release different hormones. The chlorophyll, which is, what turns them green, right, begins to pull back, and what's left are these other chemical compounds, anthocyanins and carotenoids and things that turn, carrots and beets and tomatoes all contain those same compounds to give them those colors, and that's what gets exposed. And then they go through what's called senescence, which is such a pretty word, right? Which is basically just dying back. And then why do the leaves drop, do you think? Like why don't some trees kind of hold on to theirs a little bit, like if you notice oak trees hold on to them longer and beech trees hold on to them.
Oak, right?
Yeah.
Like white or I don't even know which
Most
one it is.
both oaks.
Both?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Red and white. But what happens is leaves are filled with water, right? And so if they were to stay on the trees in freezing temperatures, they would break up and it would be problematic for the tree. They're basically not serving the tree in any way. It's better for the tree to kind of like shed them and start over in the spring. So they form kind of like a seal between the stem and the leaf, and that gradually cuts off nutrition and water from the tree, from the stems into the leaves, and then they fall away. Yeah. So this vine here is not poison ivy. It's a grape. You can touch that without fear of urushiol. And you can maybe recognize the shape of the grape leaf, right? Shagbark hickory is called that because the bark shags off, right? You can see how that happens. And what do you think of food-wise when you hear hickory?
Nuts, oak.
Nuts, smoke, yeah, it's like smoked almonds, right? Or barbecue even, right? So hickory has kind of a naturally sweet, smoky flavor to it. You can take this bark and toast it in the oven for about 15 or 20 minutes, and it will start to release this kind of delicious aroma. And then you can simmer that bark. You're having a good time. No, you. You can simmer that bark and make like a tea. It will be like a reddish brown tea that has that aroma. I usually use that tea to make a simple syrup. Just combine it with equal amounts of sugar. And people sell that now. Some people prefer it to maple syrup. It's not, made from the tree juice like maple is, but it's pretty fun. So you can see how it has that kind of naturally reddish color, right? So shagbark hickory, generally I wouldn't pull the bark off the tree. This piece was just about ready to fall off. You can look around the ground and there will often be big pieces of the bark. Sometimes it has a lot of lichen on it. Just scrub the lichen off and toast it in the oven and then simmer it. You know what this is? What?
Queen Anne's lace.
Okay, everybody knows Queen Anne's lace. What's another common name for Queen Anne's lace? The Latin is Daucus carota, which means wild carrot, which is what this is. And another common name is bird's nest plant, because you see when the flowers die back and make their seeds, it looks kind of like a bird's nest. You can just use your sense of smell actually to help you identify this plant. If you pull the root, it really does smell just like a carrot. What's interesting is that at different times of year, you're able to enjoy different parts of the plant. So what's the right time of year to dig roots?
About right now. Spring?
Both correct. Because think about what I said before about the plant putting all of its energy up, right? 2 times when it's not doing that is both early spring and fall. At that time, the energy is going back down into the roots and all the good like carbohydrates and starches are down there. So digging in the cold weather is the best time. But then in fall, you're able to go around and, meet the different seeds of different plants. And seeds are, really nutritious because they're the germ of life, right? So of course they have protein, fat, and carbohydrates in them. So you have to get a lot to get nutrition from them, but often they're very abundant.
Determine
You
that.
know, the thing about identifying fungi, and there's going to be, yeah, that's that's somebody else actually, I think. Yeah. So thanks, because that's helpful.
Is that a tiny jack-o'-lantern? No.
No. There are so many different species of mushrooms that there's no hard and fast rules. People are always like, oh, the brown ones with the blah, blah, blah are edible. I'm like, no. You have to learn to identify each one individually, and you're paying attention, again, here it is, looking to see in this very specific way all of these details. So first you're looking at the color of the cap, and then we both noticed that it has these little kind of freckles on it,
Yeah,
right?
that's what makes me think it's honey.
And then you're looking on the bottom to see if it has gills or pores, or some mushrooms even have little teeth. You've all probably seen lion's mane at this point, the one that they sell at the farmer's market. Those are teeth. So the gills, pores, and teeth are all mechanisms for what?
Identification.
And
Oh, reproducing spores.
dropping spores, right? That's what the spores come out of. So this here we have a gilled mushroom, right? But here we also have a gilled mushroom, and look how different those gills are. Can you see? So the spacing of the gills, the color of the gills, the way the gills attach to the stem, the length of the stem, whether the stem has a bulb at the bottom of it or not. When you break it open, does it have a string cheese-like consistency, which this does? Sometimes they're cottony, sometimes they're empty. Sometimes they're super prone to being eaten by bugs. All these things are characteristics that you're paying attention to. Is the edge of the cap wavy? Does it turn under? Does it have like a little umbel or a bump in the middle of the cap? There's so many identifying characteristics, and sometimes the only difference between one mushroom and another is the color of the spore print. So, it's a kind of a steep learning curve, which is why, in a way, I started out just like looking for the ones that were edible. And fortunately, there's about 6 or 7 kinds in this area that are easy to identify, edible, and don't have any toxic lookalikes. So chicken of the woods, hen of the woods, oyster mushrooms, lion's mane, chanterelles, black trumpet mushrooms. Those are all morels, yeah, in the spring.
Red leaf viburnum.
Maple leaf viburnum, yeah. So it's masquerading as a maple. When you identify maples, it's very helpful to look at what's called the sinuses. And sinus means bay in Latin. So if you're looking at a map, it's kind of the carved out parts, right? And on the red maple, this is the viburnum, but on an actual red maple, the sinus is an acute angle like this, right? On a sugar maple, it has like a round sinus. This kind of has both going on. But that's kind of the foolproof way, because you think that you're going to do it by the lobes or by the size or something like that, but that's not helpful, really. Oh, let's look at what's behind you. Yeah, so this is a witch hazel. What else do you notice on this witch hazel?
The nuts.
The nuts,
Yeah. So they look a little bit like hazelnuts, which is how this gets its common name.
What's his common name?
Witch hazel?
Oh, hazel.
Yeah. One other distinctive thing about this plant is that it flowers in the cold weather. Like, I just was on a walk this week where I live, and we already have some that are flowering. Have you ever seen the flowers? They're very, very beautiful. They're like spindly and yellow, and they have a very, almost like a marine smell to them. And the flowers and the fruit, which are these nuts, will appear on the tree at the same time, which is unusual. Also, this has a very interesting seed dispersal strategy, which is ballistic. When the seeds are ripe, the pods will open and they'll shoot out with like the force of a sneeze. So I've often stood by a witch hazel tree for extended periods hoping that that would happen, but I've never actually witnessed it.
I've never walked around this part of.
Isn't it pretty? Yeah. So, what do we have here?
They're puffballs.
Puffballs. What are those little white things?
Wow.
See those?
Yeah. Oh, the way
Those are called hyphae. Those are like little mushroom roots that go down and tap into the mycelium, right? Oh, this is a russula.
Yep.
Some of these mushrooms are edible. This one that's bright red is called the sickener because it's an emetic. So I don't eat any of these because their common name is brittlegill. And as you can see, there's really not much to them. Commonly the cuticle, which is the colored part of the cap, peels off really easily. The gills are brittle and the stem snaps like chalk. This is like a really old, abused one. But somebody thought it was interesting, so we picked it. Yeah. Puffballs are edible, and when they're pure white inside is when you can eat them. I would peel off the brown skin, and then you can just saute these up with your eggs. I'll pass this around so you can enjoy its pleasing marshmallowy texture. Do not eat these raw.
Really big, right?
Some do. This is a different kind. There are giant puffballs. Yeah.
Are they also edible? The giant?
Yeah, all puffballs are edible when they're pure white inside. Any color of yellow or brown or anything like that, you don't want to eat them.
And they have the dust.
Yeah, they smell good, don't they?
Right?
Well, you mean when the spores become airborne?
Yeah.
They'll ripen now. You know, they take a little while. They gradually turn brown, and then once the spores are all powdered, the cap develops a little hole in it and it puffs out. Loops are handy little tools to have to bring you into a further state of wonder because you can get up close and personal with interesting designs. And if you look on the bottom of mushrooms sometimes, you can see there's a whole insect life going on in there. There's like, they're eating, they're making love, they're having babies. It's all going on in mushroom gills. So, very fun. Did everyone get to squidge a puffball? Very satisfying.
It's like a little stress ball.
Right? Do you see how that just broke right away? I could have known that it was going to. This is called crowded parchment fungus. Sometimes when you see it, it's really, really bright orange. I know you've probably seen it like that. What is this fungus doing on this wood, do you think? What's that?
Decomposing.
Yeah. So I used to think that fungi were the decomposers of the wild world, and they are. They're also the life givers, though. They basically are just instrumental in the life cycle. Do you all know about what the mycelium is? No? So in the last 5 years or so, there's been a lot more knowledge passed down from this female scientist, Suzanne Simard. She's Canadian. She grew up in a foresting family. And she herself worked in the forestry industry for a long time. She began to notice that monocultures of trees weren't really thriving in the same way as more integrated forests. You know, in the forestry industry, they go in and they clear cut areas, and then they replant with just the trees that are going to be the most cost effective for them, right? So they're basically creating forests just to be cut down, but the forests that they were creating were not growing as healthily as a more integrated forest. And she tried to point this out, and she was kind of laughed out of the industry. And she managed to get funding for her own lab, and she realized that it was, I think it was Douglas fir and birch trees, that when they were growing together, they were much stronger and healthier than when they were just trying to grow the fir trees alone. And she realized that it had to do with the way that the trees were supporting each other. They were like families, basically, and even supporting each other across species. And that the way they were doing it was by communicating and sending both messages as well as nutrients and, you know, other needed sources of nutrition through the fungal network. And so you would think that trees with these sophisticated root systems would be super talented at uptaking water and nutrition from the soil, but they're not. They need the fungi to facilitate that. And so the, you know, there's basically fungi that decompose and fungi that grow on the roots and nodes of plants. They have all these different roles in the ecosystem. So on my previous walk here, I didn't make it anywhere near this far. And I'm glad that we did this time, because we came into this little wet, flooded area, and it has some different plants in it, including these sort of little low trees. Does anybody recognize these? They seem sort of nondescript, right? They're just like green, small. But when you get up close and pick and rub a leaf and smell what you've created in that process, it's very, very distinctive. Give it a shot.
That and you just rub it. I don't know that you've told us yet. This is a look, rub, smell.
What do you make of that smell?
Distinctive.
Do you know what this is? With kind of like a back note of cat pee, right? This is spice bush. Highly, highly aromatic plant called, yeah, it grows in shady areas. It likes rich woods. Spice bush, sometimes called Appalachian allspice. It makes little red berries that are super, super aromatic and delicious, almost like cardamom, like a native cardamom crossed with allspice. And the leaves and twigs can be simmered for a tea, and you can make a syrup with it the same way that you can with the shagbark hickory bark. It's actually quite delicious. That kind of like cat pea sharpness goes away. It's best in the spring, you know, to harvest the leaves. But a really beautiful little tree. They get bigger than this. These are quite small here. You can get that same aromatic quality from the twigs. Ooh. Is that agaricus?
I think so. Field mushroom?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bring it.
Yeah?
Thanks. Yeah. Maybe. It might also just be. Another one, right? Really, without a field guide, I don't feel comfortable because there's so many similar ones. What we haven't seen are any amanitas, which are the deadly poisonous ones. So, and I don't know if you heard me before, but you can't get poisoned just by touching a mushroom. So you're safe to pick them and bring them home. If you get a field guide, what's fun is to bring a paper bag because you don't want to put mushrooms in plastic, and just pick up whatever you have, and then when you come home, you lay them out and you get a field guide out and you try to identify them. And what's really fun is take the stem off and put them face down or gill side down or pore side down on a piece of paper that's dark enough to show pale spores and light enough to show dark spores. So like craft paper or something works well.
Aluminum foil.
Or aluminum foil, yeah. And then you just
Foils are really good.
leave them for even a few hours or overnight, and then they'll drop their spores and leave these amazing patterns. Have you ever seen that? Also, I wanted to show you, this is what I picked up on my way out for things that made me curious. These are chestnut oak acorns. We'll see some chestnut oaks on the way back. The acorns are all slightly different in size and shape. So you see how kind of wide and long these are, right?
Is that what these huge?
Yeah, probably. Sure, let's see if they fit.
Cool.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, aren't they gorgeous?
Yes.
So, and notice what's happening, right? Because of course an acorn is a seed, and seeds sprout, right? This one not having good luck. So here's the field garlic. How did you know what it was?
Oh, I just had a lot in my old school.
How would you describe it to someone who'd never seen it before?
I'm not really sure.
Well, let's look. How is it different from just regular grass?
Well, it's like thinner and more kind of like, it can be like straight or wavy.
That's a good point. It can sometimes have almost like a kink to it. Let me show you something. Look through the loop. You hold it. And then look at the end and tell me what you see. Might have to adjust it.
It's hollow.
It's what?
Hollow.
It's hollow, right? Does that remind you of something else that you might have eaten at home?
No.
Chive. So yeah, it's like a chive. So it's got a hollow stem. So I mean, probably the number one way you're gonna know it's field garlic is if you pick it and smell it, right? Because it's so clearly. But and kind of the way it flops over, right? And then if you pull it all the way out by the root, what's under there? You know? Have you ever done that? It makes a little bulb, like a little garlic bulb, right?
The ground's too hard.
Yeah. But yeah, you can take that home, make some cheddar scones and chop some of those up in it. Yeah.
I'm hungry now.
Did you want to try?
Oh,
Smell.
I know it.
How do you recognize the bark of oak trees? Do you know? Like I can tell that this is an oak right here. They have chunky rectangular plates. Can you see that?
All oaks do.
Well, for the most part. So that's another one right there, right? Can you pick that out with your eye? Yeah. So for the most part, that's what oak bark looks like.
Is the moss on the bark any indication as well, or does that happen with many species?
So that's lichen.
Okay.
And lichen is actually two organisms living together. So this is lichen too. It's an algae and a fungus that live together, and they make lichen. And they are like a very slow growing organism that doesn't affect the trees, and it's on all different kinds of trees, so not just oak. Sorry, what about this? Here's some lichen if you want to see it up close.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
So yeah, I heard somebody say hemlock, right? What kind of a tree is hemlock? No, you're about to fall into the trap. It is not a pine. A pine is a pine.
Conifer?
Yes, or an evergreen, right? So these are trees that have needles for leaves, and that they stay green all year round. Hemlock is not related to poison hemlock. That's the problem with common names. This is Tsuga canadensis. It's a native conifer. You know, the Catskills was pretty much all logged, right, in the 1800s. They cut down almost all the trees, and hemlocks were especially popular because they're very rich in tannins. Tannins are like what makes wine astringent in your mouth. Oaks are filled with tannins too, but they strip the bark from the tannins and use that in the tanning process to tan hides that were shipped here from Europe. So there was a big industry, a tanning industry, and they killed most of the hemlocks in this area just by stripping them for the bark. Because what do tannins do? If you think about it in terms of wine, they're another thing that kind of dry your mouth down, right? So they help seal the pores of leather. So they're distinctive. The hemlock needles are short and dark green.
I was looking.
You found some. It's interesting that they detach from the nuts so soon. When you look at the bottom of hemlocks, they have little parallel white lines on the back of the needles. They're a little bit hard to see here, but you can see with the loop. Let me see. Wow. Can't see them at all in these. A little bit. These are all faded down. Normally you can see the, white lines a lot easier.
These are oak leaves, yes?
Yes,
Yes.
that's a white oak.
A white oak.
That's so pretty. The red oaks have little points. Some oaks have little points.
Yes.
I think of red as Satan, the devil has horns, and the white are the more rounded lobes.
I love this leaf shape.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
There you go. That's
So you don't need a tent yet.
What kind of tree would you say this was?
not an oak.
It's an oak.
It is an oak.
But as the tree got bigger, it kind of pushed out against those furrows, I think. But you still see it has kind of like these chunky, vertical, rectangular plates. They're just not as deeply furrowed.
Did you see these cats?
This is American linden, basswood. Beautiful tree. Generally a smaller understory tree, like witch hazel and spice bush. These are all like rich woods like this. The linden makes beautiful flowers. Europeans have been using them for tea for a long time. And then when the flowers die back, they make these little seed pods that hang down. And this year the forager chef used those to make a kind of chocolate, which I'd never seen before. They make like a brown paste that you sweeten that he said tastes a lot like chocolate. So that seems like a very fun project to explore with linden. let's take a different route back. Just there's some couple of fun plants down here on the way. Same plant, different plant. What do you think? Get closer.
Same.
Different.
Can I see the back?
Different plant.
Why different? What's different?
These are much wider.
Oh, and these have a jagged edge
One's
to the leaf.
fur. There's like
Correct. All good observations. See how hairy this is?
Yeah.
This is staghorn sumac. Staghorn because it looks like a deer's antler, right? And then this is ailanthus, tree of heaven. Has a very distinctive smell, like.
Ooh.
What does it smell like? Just take it all.
Smell that from here. Oh wow.
Peanut butter?
As in popcorn. Anybody?
Tree of heaven, that's the tree grows in Brooklyn, right? The one that grew up through the crack in the sidewalk. It's vilified now because it's a host plant for the spotted lanternfly, both non-native Asian species, right? Looks very much like staghorn sumac. Staghorn sumac is the one that it gets the beautiful fall color though, right?
So soft.
Yeah, isn't that pleasant? Yeah. One little kind of drying up, but still has a little bit left of. Do you recognize this plant? Milkweed? Yeah, milkweed. Looks like it was host maybe to some monarch caterpillars. You know, the monarch butterfly lays its eggs on the leaf of this plant, right? Everybody knows about milkweed as a pollinator plant now. Also a very good edible plant. You only eat it in its shoot stage in the spring, or you can eat the flower buds that look like little broccoli heads. You can blanch those. I like to toss them with like a miso butter or something like that. And then they make the pods, the little pods you can eat like you would okra. And actually when the flowers bloom, I also ferment those into a drink. So you can use different parts of the plant at different times in different ways. Yeah, those are very ripe and, you know, dry. You can only eat the pods when the seeds are completely immature. They're almost like a mozzarella inside, very soft and white. Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody. This was fun. Thanks, enjoy.
Thank you all so much for being here.